Benvenuti. Welcome everyone to Dairy World Tour, Episode 1, Italy. My name is Ann Lacuda. I'm one of the health and wellness managers at Dairy West, and I get to be your host throughout the entire Dairy World Tour series. And we are kicking it off today with two fantastic guest speakers. We have Rosetta Costantino joining us as our culinary expert. Rosetta is owner of Cooking with Rosetta, and she is author of two cookbooks, My Calabria and Southern Italian Desserts. And then we have Kristi Spence joining us as our nutrition expert for the episode. And Kristi is a registered dietitian nutritionist. She's also Senior Vice President of Marketing for Dairy West. So in just a few minutes, we're going to get to know Kristi and Rosetta a little bit better, and we're going to dive into all things Italy, Italian food and culture. But I do have a few housekeeping items to cover to make sure that your experience today is the best that it can possibly be. So first things first, hopefully most, if not all of you, received your dairy products box for the episode today, which was full of some awesome Idaho and Utah dairy products, your Italian recipe cards, and a few other fun surprises. And then if you're participating in the cook-along, the ricotta and the parmesan that you received in your box will be utilized in Rosetta's recipe. You did have to purchase a few other ingredients, and then we sent out a few recommended prep steps to make it easier to follow along and keep up with Rosetta during her demo. If you didn't do the prep steps yet, no worries at all. Rosetta is doing her demo mid-episode, so you actually have time right now to chop some of your parsley, grate your Parmesan while you're listening to the episode. And so we actually just popped the prep steps into the chat box. And so check that out and start getting some of your ingredients prepped if you're hoping to cook along with Rosetta. She's making her Polpette di Ricotta and Brodo. So a couple Zoom to-dos before we get started. So we are using the chat box, and we encourage all of you to use it as well to engage with us and with each other throughout the episode. So if you take a look at the bottom of your screen, you should actually see a chat button. Go ahead and click on that, and that should pop up a chat box in the right-hand side of your screen. And so you'll see the prep steps there. And then awesome, you'll see some people are sharing where they're joining from. So if you haven't done that yet, go ahead and do that now. You'll also see at the bottom of your chat box that you can chat directly with people if you'd like. So if you have some friends or family members joining and you want to say hi to them or have a conversation, you can do that in the chat. You can also chat to everyone if there's something you want to share with the entire group. We're also using the chat box for questions. So as your questions come up, type them out, enter them into the chat. We're going to be monitoring and gathering the questions throughout, and then we'll actually ask those questions to Kristi and Rosetta at the end. So we'll get to as many of those as we can at the end of the presentation, with the exception of Rosetta's demo. If you have questions while she's doing the cook-along, we'll get to those right away, because we want to make sure if you need any clarity on the recipe or anything that she's talking about, we get that answered in the moment for you. Okay, and then last Zoom thing. So we are going to be setting up a view for you on your screen that we think provides the best experience. But if you want to change that, you have the ability to do so. So if you look at the upper right-hand corner of your screen, there's a little view icon. And if you click on that, you'll see that it will give you some different options. And so for instance, if you're looking for a friend or family member that's joining, you can click gallery view, and you can browse through everyone's videos that's on the line to find them and see them and say hi from afar. All right, so before we dive into everything and we get to know Kristi and Rosetta, we have one question for all of you. And so you should see a poll box pop up on your screen in a second here. One minute. Jacqueline, do we have the poll ready for everyone?
It's up, Ann, and people are answering.
Oh, perfect. Okay, I guess I just can't see it. Sorry about that, guys. So we're just wondering, have you visited Italy? Have you lived there perhaps? Is it on your bucket list? We'd love to hear what everyone's experience with this wonderful country is. Personally, I've been there once planning this episode, I think a next second visit is on the top of my vacation list again. And in a minute here, we'll share the results so you can see what everyone says.
We've got a lot of people who've visited before, once before, some numerous times, a few who've lived there, and a ton of people with it on their bucket list.
Awesome, awesome. Well, if you haven't been and you have questions, again, put those in the chat. If you've lived there, if you visited and you have experiences you want to share those in the chat as well. We'd love to hear them. So, well, everyone, let's get started. I'd love to welcome Kristi Spence and Rosetta Costantino as our guest speakers for today. We are all in for a treat to get to spend the next little bit over an hour with the two of you. And we thought we'd really start by just letting Kristi and Rosetta tell their story. I think that's the best way for us to get to know them. And so we have a question for you both. And Kristi, we'd like to start with you. And I'd love for you to share with us, what does food mean to you and how has your connection to Italy and the Italian culture influenced that meaning?
Thanks, Anne. I love this question. And when I was thinking about it, it was great because it challenged me to go a little bit deeper. You know, I think sometimes we think, oh, because it brings people together, it tastes great. But I kept asking myself, well, why? Well, why? And what I kept coming back to is this idea of connection. And then it really resonated throughout my life. Food has been such a point of connection. And it started when I was little, and at home, we always made a point to eat together. And it was just this element of family connection. And, you know, every night I knew that we had a chance at dinner to sit down and to talk to each other about our days. And then that, you know, evolved, of course, into family traditions of holidays. And I think a lot of us share just fond food memories around the holidays. But for me, this is where Italy really plays a key role. Our Italian Easter dinners were my favorite. So my grandparents from my dad's side of the family, both have families that came from Italy and from different parts of Italy. But every year at Easter, we would have homemade sausage. My grandpa would make sausage and we would have homemade ravioli. And it was the first real time I remember feeling just so excited for a meal. I just wanted ravioli all year and we had to wait, you know, all year to get our ravioli. And then this theme of connection just really continues. I ended up studying nutrition and getting my degree in dietetics because of the need and the idea of connecting food with sports performance. So my background's in sports nutrition. I was a college athlete. And at the time in college, I never made the connection between sport and food. With the exception of when I was little, I remember my dad had a heart procedure done. This is when I was about 12. And it was the first time he went and visited a nutritionist, and we'd always eaten really healthily. But I remember he started changing some of his foods and what he was eating for this, you know, because of this procedure. And that was the first time like a seed was really planted about the connection between what you put in your body and overall health. And then that later turned into me, you know, getting my master's degree in nutrition and making this connection. And then, you know, I think about when I was doing a lot of counseling with athletes and I was doing eating disorder counseling, and it became about the connection between people and their relationship with food, and how sometimes that's hard and it's not always easy. And then more recently, I think about, you know, the reason that I went to work for dairy farmers. So Anne mentioned, you know, I work at Dairy West, was to make this connection from food. I was doing a lot with people and helping them understand their diets, but then to make the connection one step further to where food came from became really important to me. And, you know, I had the good fortune of growing up in Los Angeles, but I didn't grow up in agriculture. And so being able to go work for farmers allowed me to understand what an urban perspective, because that's what my background was, but then to learn more about just where does food come from and how is it raised, and some of those questions that I was getting asked as a dietitian. And so the last 10 years, I've been able to spend, you know, making those connections, which is something that's just really means a lot to me. And then through this pandemic, I think all of us probably have this rather salient, is this idea of food connects us and grounds us to our communities. And when we don't have access to food, or when there's food insecurity, you realize how much that is really the underpinning of being able to jump off and feel like you have security and safety. So food comes back to this like fundamental foundation and connection for the rest of life. So thanks for the question, Anne. it was really neat for me to dive into it a little bit deeper. But I guess it comes back to connection.
Thanks for sharing, Kristi. And we're going to get to hear more from Kristi a little bit later in the episode. She's going to really dive into some of the nutritional components of Italian cuisine and, how do we honor cultural traditions of a certain cuisine and also, prioritize nutrition and health. So Rosetta, I'm going to pass it off to you with the same question. What does food mean to you, and how has your Italian heritage and, connection to Italy influenced that meaning?
Well, when I thought about it, I think my first answer was it's my life. And, I was born and raised in a small town in Calabria in Italy, where I spent, my first 14 years of my life. And really being around my grandparents and my parents who literally lived off the land. And that really, I would have to say, is the first bond, the first connection I had with food. Just being around my grandmothers, I was 4 or 5 years old, and they allowed me to be. And that's really how I learned to cook. They would let me do little chores, like put the garlic or put the basil, and just continued growing. And then when we moved to Oakland, in California, where I live now, it was again, food connected me with, the people that we met here, because I only knew the foods that I grew up with in my town. The food is very local, very regional. And so a lot of our friends were from Northern Italy. And so I kept on learning about the rest of Italy, and again, food and cooking through them. And I went on, I had a very successful career in Silicon Valley, but when I decided I was going to leave that life and spend more time at home with my kids, it was, again, food that brought me back and really brought me back to my childhood and the foods that I grew up with, that I made the decision that I wanted to share those food memories and the foods of my region of Calabria. And that's what led me to start my cooking classes in 2004, and then my first cookbook. So my first cookbook, My Calabria, was really to share the foods of that region, where I grew up. And then I went on to do my second book and kept on doing the cooking classes, and then started doing culinary tours, again, really showing and sharing the foods of my region in Southern Italy, with all my guests. But it's really my life. I mean, I grow most of, all the vegetables in my garden. And what I've shared, even, with this pandemic last year, led me to start doing videos on Instagram, and I've been posting it. I've been videotaping all the recipes from my cookbook. Again, it was the way for me to share. You could say the way I share love is through food. And it's in a way goes back to what I said. It's my life. It's pretty much, most people would say that's all you do, but yes, that's what I do. And so I'm hoping that I can share some of that today with all of you. Something from, that I grew up with. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share a little bit of Italy with you. So we'll talk a little bit more about Italy. For those of you who haven't been there, those have been there, we'll see some pictures to recognize, and then we'll go ahead and start cooking, because that's what I love to do. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the first slide. And you're looking at a world map, and you can see Italy is a tiny little boot, as we refer to it, right in the middle of the Mediterranean in southern Italy. And we're going to zoom in, but even though Italy is so small compared to the rest of the world, you might be interested in knowing that it's the 8th largest country as far as GDP in the world. So I'm going to go and move on to the next. Sorry. We'll talk a little bit about where it's located. So if at the map of, we refer to Italy as the shape of a boot. boot. It's got a heel and a toe. So at the top, yeah, and it's a peninsula, so we have a very long of the Mediterranean, but on the map you can see we have identified the different seas. So we usually refer to the terrain, like my region is located Calabria, but we also face the Ionio Sea on the other side. So those are just the local names of the sea, but typically it's, we refer to it as right in the and has two large islands, the island of Sardinia and of Sicily. Let's talk a little, we're going to look a little bit about the landscape, just to give you what Italy is like. So if you...
Hey, Rosetta.
Yes.
I'm just going to pop in real quick. Your audio is going in and out a bit. So I just wanted to let you know to make sure you're sharing such great information.
Yeah, I'm, can you hear me now?
Yeah, that appears to be better now.
Okay.
Okay.
For what happened. So if we look at this map, more the landscape, so green are mountains, okay? So if you look at Italy, it's very mountainous. At the top, we have really the highest peaks, the Alps. The Dolomites are more on the Austrian side, and but they sort of hug all of northern Italy, the Alps. And then you have this very large area, which we'll come back to it, which is in Italy, where the river, the Po River, the longest river, cuts across from pretty much from, you could say, the western to the eastern side. And then the southern spine that goes down all the way to the tip of the toe, it's what we refer to as the Apennine. So it's like a spine. So as you can see, there's this long spine of mountains. So very mountainous in general, but we do have some fertile areas, flat areas that you see that are sort of white. Let's see, the next one I wanted to mention, we had in southern Italy, we have three large, I'm going to go back just to show you where they are, three large active volcanoes. There's a Vesuvius here where I have my mouse, which is right outside Naples. And then we have a very active one, which is actually erupting right now. If you go online, you can see some amazing picture of Mount Etna in Sicily. And then the other one is right here. It's an island, Stromboli, and it takes the name of Stromboli. So here there are pictures. There's Mount Vesuvius, which is active, but hasn't been for a very long time. I think a lot of you know that the last one, the major one was when it destroyed the town of Pompeii. And then here's Mount Etna and Stromboli. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about agriculture, just to give you a feel for what grows in Italy. As I mentioned earlier, this is the most fertile valley, the valley of the Po River. And it goes from Piedmont, and then you have Lombardy, you have Veneto, and you have Emilia-Romagna. So this is where most of the grains, mainly rice, actually Italy is one of the largest producer of rice in Europe, where rice is grown, and soybeans, and a lot of dairy, okay? Because again, being flat land, there are a lot of cows. So this is the land of Parmigiano Reggiano in Emilia-Romagna, but a lot of the cheeses that are produced with cow's milk. And the rest of Italy produces mainly olive oil, wine. And in southern Italy is where the majority of the fruits, vegetables, and durum wheat Durum wheat is the grain, the wheat that is grown to make pasta. So a lot of it is grown in these green areas that you see in Puglia, also in Sicily. But those are really the main crops of Italy. And Italy, in case you don't know, is the largest producer of wine. So they produce a lot of wine. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the history of Italy as we know it today. So Italy really didn't exist as a country, as a united country as we know it today, and it wasn't until 1861. And prior to that, it was more of a bunch of little countries. You could look at it that way. And so we'll go back a little bit to talk about how the food influenced by who was there. So if we go back to really the first people, I would say that we give a lot of credit for bringing a lot of the foods in terms of olives or even vines, vineyards and so forth, or the Greeks. The Greeks settled in mainly in northern Italy, but they got pretty far up, and they were there for a very long time, and it really influenced the cooking of southern Italy. And then of course the Romans came along, they kicked them out, and the Romans going all over, they brought a lot to I would say to Italy and the rest of Europe. But it was really after the collapse of the Roman Empire that Italy changed as I would say as one country, because everybody wanted to invade it, and just about everybody invaded Italy. And that's really what shaped, I think, the food of Italy. When my students say, oh, it's Italian food, I always say, no, there's no such thing as Italian food. The food is very regional and very local, even within a region, again, because of who's in there. So after the Roman Empire collapsed, we had just about everyone. We had, the Byzantines, we had the Lombards, we had Visigoths, we had Swabians, Arabs. The Arabs are really had a major influence in southern Italy, especially in Sicily. In fact, the cooking of Sicily is very different than the mainland. And then, of course, the Spaniards. I think the Spaniards brought all the foods from the New World and really settled in southern Italy, which was the kingdom of the Two Sicily was really under the Spaniards for a very long time. So they had a major, I would say, influence in the foods. That's where we got the tomatoes and potatoes and squash and chocolate, you name it. They all brought it. So we owe a lot to them also for, that they came from the New World. And it wasn't until 1861 when Italy became unified as a country, and really the language, the official language of it was adopted was Italian, which is what we all speak today. But just to be aware of, as I mentioned, because of all the different people that invaded different parts of Italy, every region has a dialect. And even within a region, for example, in my region, the dialects are very different, even from town to town. Our dialect is closer to Neapolitan or Latin, where if you go on the eastern side, in the south, they still speak Old Greek, because again, from the Greek influence. So there are many dialects. So if I go in northern Italy, in Trentino or Friuli, where they border Austria, if they speak their dialect, I can't understand a word. It's like a foreign language, just like they won't understand my dialect. So that's that still, I mean, they're disappearing. The dialects are slowly disappearing, but they're still there, and people still do speak them. So I speak both. I speak the dialect, I speak Calabrese, and I speak Italian, because at school, of course, you're taught Italian. So But we've got the Sicilian, the Neapolitans, Calabrese. I'm sure some of you have heard of. So I am going to take you through a virtual tour. I picked some major cities in Italy. I can't show you. I had hundreds of pictures, but I can't show you all because it would take too long of a time. But we're going to start up north. We're going to go to Milan, and then we'll just kind of wind our way through, and then we'll end up in the south. So the first picture is Milan. As you can see, Milan is a cosmopolitan, very industrial city in northern Italy. It's what we refer to as the sort of the capital of fashion and design. It's the financial center of Italy. So I think of Milan as New York. You could think of it that way. But still a lot of beautiful art, even in Milan. And this is one of the most famous piece of architecture that people recognize with Milan is the Duomo, their cathedral. And let's hop over to Venice. I think you guys have all seen pictures of Venice. I have to say this is the most romantic city of Italy. We're going to Florence, really the home of all the Renaissance masterpieces. If you're into art history, definitely you have to visit Florence. And one of the most beautiful piece of architecture here also is the Duomo of Florence. And I think that the tower was done by Giotto. But it's a place to go if you want to see the David, you want to see any of the artwork of Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci. This is where you go. And I popped this one in. There were so many beautiful towns along the coast, but I think a lot of you know Cinque Terre. It's famous, just like the Amalfi Coast is to most people. Charming little towns, on the coast of Liguria. And of course, I think everyone knows Rome, the Eternal City. Even if you haven't been there, you've heard of Rome. It's everyone, I'm sure, has heard of the Roman Empire, but this is one of the monuments, you could say, that everyone identifies with Rome is the Colosseum. But Rome, you could spend weeks and weeks. There's so much left behind by the Romans that you can explore. And of course, it has the smallest country in the world is within Rome. It's the Vatican. So this is a Vatican picture of the Vatican City. Where the Pope lives, and of course, more museum in here, the Sistine Chapels, and unbelievable museum to see. So it's and this is the largest, most populous city in Italy. And this one is a picture of Ascoli Piceno. This is a city in Marche, and we included it because Kristi's side of the family are from this city. And Marche is not a well-known region, just like its neighbors, Abruzzo or Calabria or Molise. But, hopefully more people travel and discover these towns. I don't have a lot of picture of small towns, but a lot of medieval towns, really charming towns. And the best way to explore Italy, I think, is to visit those small towns. And we're down to Naples. I think a lot of you know Naples for pizza or pasta. And there's a Vesuvius right in the background, but it's a major seaport also in Italy, where I would say the majority of all the immigrants sailed from Naples to Ellis Island. And we're going down south a little bit into Puglia. This is Alberobello. Alberobello, along with the next town, their UNESCO town. This is Matera in Basilicata. Really a town that if you get a chance to go to Italy, you should visit. In up to the 50s, people lived in the cave, even with their animals. And they were all, required to move out by the government. And late in the last 20 years, actually, it has become a tourist attraction because they've remodeled and put some of the most beautiful hotels. So it's also a UNESCO town. And Italy, in case you don't know, has the most. It has 55. So lots of UNESCO heritage sites to explore if you visit. And we'll hop to Palermo. This is sort of my second home because my husband is from Palermo, Sicily. Another beautiful architectural monument. This is the cathedral. There again, lots and lots of art and history to see in Palermo and in Sicily. And we hop to my region, Calabria. This is the only picture I got in there of the coastline, but beautiful coastline and beautiful beaches. And the last one is a picture of my town. So this is where I was born and raised, a small town, agricultural town. And you can't really see the mountains in the back, but very high peaks in the back. So this is what I had. I think I'm doing okay with time. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen, and I will move on to doing the demo. Okay, so I think most of you have received this box. And let's see if you can see it. Okay. I'm going to open it and see if you guys can see it. And you have the recipes. Okay, you have, I already grated my cheese. You have a piece of Parmesan. So this would be the equivalent, the Parmigiano Reggiano in Italy. And you have ricotta. So you will need these two ingredients. We're not going to use the rest of the ingredients. You have the mustard. You also have a recipe how you can use it, or you can make. Everybody knows tiramisu, and you have cream, and there's a glass in there, and a map. Okay, I am going to talk a little bit about the recipe. So you should have the recipe in the envelope. You actually get two of my recipes in here. You have the polpette di ricotta, which I'll talk about it, and you have the parmigiana di zucchine, and then you have a spread for crostini with uses the mascarpone, and you can also make a simple gelato with the cream. So the recipe that if you have the recipe in front of you, I just want to talk about the ingredients that you need. Let's see, can they? I think I should be able to see everything, right? So I don't know if you want to spotlight the other camera, the one that says Rosetta Kitchen.
Yeah, we've got them both spotlighted for you, Rosetta.
Okay. So what you need is the entire pouch that you have, okay? And I am just going to squeeze it all out in a bowl. And it's actually, I was concerned if it was wet, but it's not the way they packaged it. It's mainly all ricotta, which is really nice. A lot of times, you know, it's very wet. So you'll need the ricotta, and then you need the cheese. Now the cheese, I already grated it, as you can see. But when you grate it, I just want to tell you, the way we grate cheese in Italy, we always use this side. I don't know if you guys can see it. The one with the little holes, okay? So it ends up with a really almost like a dust. I'll just do a little bit because I've already done it, okay? But it looks more like a dust compared to, let's say, shredding it. Maybe I can put it here, okay? So you see it's very fine, okay? So you'll need that. So I'm going to put it in the bowl, okay? And then you need breadcrumbs. Now the recipes, I wrote it with fresh breadcrumbs because traditionally, a lot of the recipes, that's what they used to use. Like in Calabria, we make a really pretty dense bread. And so the Italians got really clever in utilizing breadcrumbs. It would stretch a lot of dishes too, but they didn't have a blender or a food processor to make fine dried breadcrumbs. So they would grate the bread. So if you grate the bread on the same grater that I grated the cheese, you get these breadcrumbs, like this. See, they're sort of moist compared to a dried breadcrumb, which, a dried breadcrumb is more like a flour, okay? So that's what I'm using. But if you don't have it, you can use a regular dried breadcrumbs and parsley. Okay, so that's a really simple recipe. And one of the reasons why I picked this recipe, I mean, they're very common in Calabria, but I've never seen it here. And I included in a version in my cookbook, the recipe that you have, where we're going to make these tiny little, I don't want to call them, they're polpette, typically translates as meatballs in English, but these don't have any meat. So we'll call them ricotta balls. But I included the recipe in these tiny little ricotta balls poached in broth, chicken broth, or you can use a vegetable broth. But I make this recipe in 3 different ways. And that was one of the reasons why I picked it. And if I have time, I'm going to show you the 3 different ways. So one way is the way we'll do it. We'll poach them in broth. The other way is to coat them with breadcrumbs and fry them. So like an appetizer. And the third way, which is really one of my favorite, is to braise them, poach them in tomato sauce. So the only thing you need to do here, I'm sorry, I forgot one ingredient that I didn't get. I need 2 eggs. And then you need a little bit of black pepper. So make a note on the recipe card. We just noticed there was a little typo. It says 1 tablespoon of ground black pepper. Don't put a tablespoon unless you want it really, really spicy. So it only needs few grinding. In fact, in the text, it's correct. It says few grinds, but in the recipe card, it says one tablespoon. So just put few grinds of the black pepper. And then I'm just going to put in the 2 eggs. Oops. Okay. I'm just going to beat them a little bit, but you could even put them directly in it.
Hey, Rosetta, on your grater, Jenny just asked, is that the zest side that you're grating the Parmesan on?
No, it's not. This is the zest, what I would call the zest. You see the difference? This is the one I use. It's got like the round holes. You want to get our manual one or the old one, the really old one. So I don't know if it's easier to see it on this one.
Yeah, yep.
Okay, see what it looks like? Okay, and then this would be more of what you get. You kind of get long, skinny shreds. So this is kind of what I have, the Italian one, but you can see it's the same. I used this one just a little while ago. I haven't cleaned it where I grated the cheese, but there are these tiny little holes. And that's how you get that fine dust, which does make a difference in a lot of dishes. Like if you make cacio e pepe, the classical Roman, you really want to have that fine dust if you want to do it right. So this one, the only thing you need to do is, mix it really well until it's all blended. And one thing I would suggest, because I looked at the ricotta and it doesn't have any salt, okay? The original recipe in my cookbook, I make the ricotta and there is salt, and a lot of the ricotta has salt. And also the recipe has pecorino, because, in southern Italy, we tend to use pecorino cheese, which is made with sheep's milk. And it's saltier than Parmigiano Reggiano or Parmesan. So you might want to put a little bit of salt, but even if you leave it as it is, it's okay. So I would just kind of put a little bit on top. Okay, and so this, you're done at this point. Now, what I typically do is I make this ahead at least half an hour to an hour before, and I let it sit. Okay, by letting it sit, it's sort of the breadcrumbs all hydrate and it's a little easier to shape. Can I have the tray I had here? Oh, that one. Okay, but even I'm going to try it even with this. Okay, so what you want to do for this one with the broth, you want them really tiny. Okay, think of like tortellini, right? Because it's like a soup. You want to get a couple, one or two in a spoon. You don't want them to be too big. Okay, so what you do is I'm just going to show you one, but I don't measure them typically. Okay, but this is the size you would make them, and this is fine. It's actually you can shape them easily. They're not too wet. But if it is a little wet, rather than try to add more breadcrumbs to it, because you're trying to taste the ricotta and eat ricotta rather than eat, breadcrumb. Just let it sit even half an hour to an hour in the fridge, and then it'll make it easier. But can you see how tiny they are? Okay, so you want to make them like marble size. So I don't know how many of you are making some, but I'm just going to make few. And my broth is boiling. It's actually a little too high. I'm going to lower it.
And Rosetta, I answered a question that came in, but I want to make sure I answered it correctly. The flour has not been added yet, correct? They'll roll the balls in the plate of flour?
No, right now I'm just shaping them, okay? So I'm just going to do a few more. And I did a few earlier because I wanted to show you the different size in case I was running out of time. So what you want to do is once you shape them, okay, I'm just going to, you guys can see all that. I'm just going to put them with the flour, and this sort of seals them, okay? And then just lightly coat them with flour. You don't want a lot of flour. Shake it off. Okay, I'm just going to put them back there. And I'm going to do a couple more. I'm just going to do a few for to demonstrate. Okay, and I did these before, and I just want to show you the different insides. Okay, so these would be for the ones in broth. You see, they're like marble size. These would be for the appetizer. Okay, and these would be the ones that go in tomato sauce. So these are like half an inch. These are maybe, I don't know, an inch, and these are maybe an inch and a half. Okay, just to give you an idea. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to finish these little guys. And while they poach, I'm hoping I can show you the others. Okay. Okay, so I am going to put them in, and they just go in the broth, and they're going to sink at the bottom. And once they float, these cook really quickly. Okay, doesn't take much time at all because there's really not a whole lot to cook. Okay, and once they float, I'm going to take them out, and then I'll show you. So what I would do with these, okay, the ones that are for the appetizer, I would coat them in the breadcrumbs. These are the dried fine breadcrumbs, and it would just coat them. So they end up with a nice crispy coating. So they're really nice as a finger food. Okay, so this is kind of what they look like. Okay, so I'm just going to put them here. I'm going to see if I can't finish it, what we can do at the end, they should be done cooking. I can show you the final picture of what they look like, the appetizer versus the one that go in tomato sauce.
Oh, that'll be perfect, Rosetta.
So these are already, you can see they're starting to float. See some of them already floating on top. Okay, and the tomato sauce, I already made it. Okay, so this is my simple tomato sauce. And what you want to do, if it reduces quite a bit, add some water to it so that when you put the polpette in there, it comes halfway, and so it's not dry. And by the time they cook, which takes a good like 10 minutes or so, the tomato sauce would be the right consistency. So what I would do with this one, you would just put them in there. I'm just gonna put them. I'm just gonna do these 4, just to show you, just like that. Okay, and I'm gonna set it in the back. Okay. And I'll try to fry those. So those would just get fried in nice olive oil till they're golden on the outside, and then those will be ready to serve. So these are already floating. They're all floating on top. Okay. So what I do is I am going to take them out. I'm going to actually go ahead and put the tomato sauce here. We'll start that. Just gonna spoon them just to show you how you would serve them. Now these are, as they are vegetarian. And, but if you wanted to add like a little bit of chopped ham or prosciutto or soppressata, it's in Calabria, it's very common actually to put soppressata. That's typically what we would do if we wanted to add that. But I would just put in a little bit of parsley just to garnish it. And that would be this dish. This one you can see they're simmering. So the only thing I would do if you're gonna do them in the tomato sauce, I mean, I only did 4. I would put more than that, but space them. Don't put them right next to each other because they do expand. And as they're cooking, don't stir them, okay? Don't try to stir them around. The only thing you want to do is like, you know, put a little bit of the tomato sauce on top, just like that. And I'm going to let these finish. And in the back, I'm going to switch here. I'm going to do the ones in oil, if I can get them done. Let's see. You mind taking that one, put it there? So with the ones that you fry in olive oil, as I said, I fry in olive oil. I know a lot of people are concerned about frying in olive oil, but that's what I grew up with. All we had was olive oil. We made our own olive oil, and that's what we used. And it's perfectly fine to fry in olive oil. You just don't want to go very high. So typically when we fry in all of our dishes, we're staying around 365 degrees, okay? Which you don't want to get to, let's say 380 or 400, you know, it would be too high. And I'm going to see if this is close enough. Let's see where we're at.
Hey, Rosetta.
Yes.
Quick question for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, just a question for you on the ricotta balls and sauce. Do you want to keep those to a low simmer?
Yes. You don't want them boil fast. Just kind of a gentle simmer. So I'm going to turn it on for a second so that they should be done by the time we're done with everything. Let's see. I think I'm amazed. I'm doing okay with time, that I got those on time. Are there any other questions I can answer in the meanwhile?
Let me see. I think those are most of the questions that came in about the demo. We did get an earlier question asking about the gardening seasons in Italy, if there are specific growing seasons or if it's all year.
It's very similar, I would say, to California. So it's some sort of, you know, I feel blessed that my parents moved to California rather than maybe, you know, Midwest or the East Coast, where it's a lot colder. So that they do have seasons more than we do here in California. So right now, it's cold, and, you know, they start planting, I would say, in the next month or so. All the spring and summer vegetables get planted, and then the summer, especially in southern Italy, gets very hot. Again, one of the reasons why most of the vegetables and fruits are grown in southern Italy compared to, let's say, northern Italy. And the winter gets very cold, depending where you are. Again, the south is milder compared to up north in the Alps, where, you know, you have all the ski resorts. But yeah, I would say very, very similar to here. Okay, I'm going to try and see if this is getting ready. I just wanted to show you guys one way to test your oil, if you don't have a thermometer, is just to put a little bit of the breadcrumbs and see if they pop up quickly. Of course, the thermometer is always the easiest way to do it. Okay, so this is hot. I'm actually gonna even lower it. So I'm gonna put these in. Okay, see, they sizzle right away when you put them in. And as soon as they're brown, they're basically ready to go. And let's see if I can have, I'm just gonna grab a plate. So the only thing you would do, this will get two ready. The only thing you would do is take them out and put them on some paper towel, and then you would serve them as an appetizer. And as I said, it's like finger food. Oops.
And then Rosetta, we have a couple.
This hot plate gets hot very fast. Whoa. Go ahead.
Couple questions coming in about the ricotta balls and sauce. How long do you cook them in the sauce?
About 10 minutes.
About 10 minutes. Okay. And then for the ricotta balls in broth, let's see. How long do you typically cook them in the broth? I did mention they should float to the top, but
as soon as they float to the top, it can be, a minute, it can be 2 minutes. Okay. So my hot plate went really fast, but just to give you an idea, so they're a little darker than I would typically do them. I didn't think it was that hot. Okay, but this is what they would look like. The ones that would be as an appetizer. And let's move this one back here, just to show you. So this one, I just need to turn it on. Hold on a second. Okay. But you see, I mean, it's only been a few minutes, maybe 4 or 5 minutes, but see, they're already holding up, the shape really well. Okay. So I'm just going to lower this. I can actually take them out. You want to give me a plate? We'll show all 3 of them.
And then Rosetta, do you recommend serving the appetizer with a sauce, the fried ricotta balls?
Typically, Italians don't dip in sauces, okay? But because, and the reason I always tell my students that, because we do all kinds of polpette in Italy. We do them with vegetables, we do them with ricotta, we do them with fish. We typically don't, other than, the ones that are in tomatoes, I would serve them with tomato sauce or the meatballs, like when I do the eggplant, because you really want to taste the ingredient. And if you end up coating this all in tomato sauce, you're tasting the tomato sauce. So the best way is just to eat them like that. And they are amazing.
They are. I made them over the weekend. They're delicious.
But this is the one that was in the recipe, so you can see what it looks like. So I think I made it on time. So I think what we want to do is just toast to Dairy West. So if you guys have a glass, here it is. So buon appetito.
Buon appetito.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Rosetta. So now I am going to share, and I'm going to dive in and talk a little bit about food, nutrition, and culture. So, hopefully bring some of the food and the demo and this tour that Rosetta just took us on, back to some of the food culture and nutrition. And to start, I just want to share a quick story with you. When I finished my dietetics degree, I was teaching a class at the University of Utah. It was called Healthy Weight for Life. And I asked my students this question. I said, does America have a food culture? And I didn't go in with any sort of preconceived idea of what their answer should be. There was no right or wrong answer, but I was just really curious, as a people, America was kind of founded as this melting pot. We have people who come from all over. Yes, we have holiday traditions, but I was curious if people thought that we really had a food culture. So, with that said, I want to dive into Italy, which is a place that has a very rich food culture. And Rosetta mentioned it's not so much the country itself, Italian food, but it's these regional cuisines that are based on a lot of different things. So what is Italian food? And, Rosetta, I love that you mentioned there's really no such thing as Italian food. And a lot of this really depends on perspective. Because as Americans, I think, oh yeah, we think about going out to an Italian restaurant, or what you see in front of you is a picture of a Chicago deep dish pizza. we're like, yeah, pizza's Italian food, no matter what kind of pizza it is. And that's because as Americans, I think we lump a lot of foods that we would find in the region of Italy, as just Italian food. So Italian food is definitely, I think the way we view it is, through this lens of perspective and who's asking and where's it coming from. But also geography. So you'll remember in this tour, Rosetta, I loved your slide with the map of Italy and going around and, just showing us where the rivers are and where the mountains are, because so much of the regional cuisine and the culture behind it is based on what is available where. And so I think a lot of the culture and a lot of the types of dishes that are prepared are based on that. If you have ricotta made from a sheep's milk down in the southern part of Italy, you're going to use that to make something like polpette. Or if you are in the northern part of Italy where there are more creams and butters, that's what's going to inspire a lot of your culture and the dishes there. And then the last thing I think, for me, Italian food and this perspective that I think about it in is a lot about tradition. So when we were talking at the very beginning about what food means to us, I mentioned my grandparents, their heritage is being from Italy. And so I mentioned my love of these ravioli we have at Easter time. And my grandparents have since passed away. But the one thing I asked for from my grandma was her pasta maker. And so ever since she passed away, my family has continued this tradition, no matter where we are, if it's, a lot of us or just, 4 of us, I have 2 little boys, together, we make ravioli. And so it is this, long process that's just filled with so much love and remembering of my grandparents. But we roll out the pasta dough and we make our ricotta cheese and we stuff them and we, hand shape them and cook them. And it's just become something that's really fun. So for me, Italian food is, a lot about tradition as well. So I want to show you this picture of, some foods and then tie these things to, those 3 lenses that we talked about, and also to different dishes that you may think of. So I saw one person asked in the chat, what vegetables might you grow in a home garden or do you see grown in Italy that you may, incorporate into your own cooking? And Rosetta mentioned wine and grapes. And so Italy is they produce a lot of wine. And so you see some vineyards in the picture on your screen. And wine in Italy is a little bit different in terms of how it's culturally part of meals. And I remember visiting family once, and I have a cousin who was at the time 8 years old, and we're sitting down to a meal, and they just, he had a little glass of water and they poured a little splash of wine in his glass. And as American, I was kind of like, oh, that's really interesting. But it's just, when you think about flavors and culture and tradition, it was just part of the meal. Those flavors are part of the meal. And my family has a winery. And so it's very much part of the culture to, hey, this is the wine that we need to taste it. We need to make sure it's good. It's part of what we do every day. And also I remember my cousin asking me how much wine costs in the United States. And, I told him, and it differs based on type of bottle of wine. And he was kind of incredulous. He thought, wow, a good bottle of wine really, it's ubiquitous. It should just be part of your meal. It shouldn't cost more than, a couple euro. And so, it's just interesting to think about the cultural differences. I have olives on here. Rosetta talked a little bit about, the southern part of Italy being rich in olive oil production. We talked a little bit about herbs. Rosetta, I love what you said about serving things simply. You have these fried ricotta balls that are very simply served. And I remember, some of the herbs that you routinely see in Italian cooking. You think of things like oregano and sage, basil to make pesto. And one time we were enjoying these fried sage leaves. And they were these beautiful, rounded, really thick, firm sage leaves that were just fried like you just demonstrated in some olive oil and sprinkled with, some sea salt. And that was it. And you just tasted the sage and it was so good. So we came home and we figured we had to make these. And so to this day, I have this huge sage plant in my yard in one of those kind of chopped off wine barrels. And, it's a perennial herb. So every year it comes back and the leaves are now really big. And so we can make these fried sage leaves at home. And it's, it takes us back to Italy, but it's just such a delicious dish that's just made from an herb. You see, on your screen there, a picture of Italian parsley. So Rosetta, I think this is what you use to sprinkle over. But Italian parsley, when you go to the store, this is the flat-leafed parsley. Sometimes it's called flat-leaf parsley. And don't confuse it with cilantro. They have totally different flavors. Cilantro has a little bit more rounded edges, but Italian parsley is a really, really fresh, wonderful herb that is just really nice in a lot of different dishes. Let's see, the coasts, Rosetta, you talked about, Italy, depending on where you are in the boot, there's a lot of water that surrounds Italy. And, it sits in the Mediterranean. And, I think because of that, a lot of Italian cuisine is generally thought of, when we think of the Mediterranean diet, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But on the east coast of Italy, on the Adriatic Sea, which is where my family is from, there is lots of seafood. And I remember being at a dinner once, and I think it was a 7-course meal, and every course was a different type of seafood, because that's what's there. And that's just part of what they were serving, because you're fishing in the Adriatic Sea and you can get, fish and seafood there. So the other thing that we've talked a little bit about is cheese. And I want to talk a little, Italy, when it comes to cheese production as a country, produces the most variety of cheeses in the world. And in terms of volume of cheese, they are the 3rd largest cheese producer behind Germany and France. And Italy has so many different varieties of cheese. And, what's really interesting is, Rosetta mentioned this, there are certain types of cheeses that are very, very distinctive to a certain region of Italy. So like Parmigiano Reggiano or a mascarpone. And they have something called the protected designation of origin, which if you ever see on a food product that's being imported, from Italy specifically, but the EU has also adopted this designation, it may say DOP on it. And for wine, it'll say DOC. But what that is that it's part of this, protected designation. And to receive that, it can only be produced in that region. So in your box, you have cheeses that are made in the style of these cheeses, that you would find in this particular region of Italy. And so you can use a local cheese to make, a dish that might use, a cheese that was produced in this particular region. So just wanted to highlight that. It's something that, we may not always know. 2 of the cheeses in your box, so the mascarpone and the Parmesan, both come from the northern part of Italy, kind of in that Lombardy region, which is where Milan is. And then, ricotta is typically a cheese that you would find in southern Italy. It can be made with sheep's milk or cow's milk. So some other regional dishes that I want to highlight. So we talked about butter and creams really being more indicative of northern Italian cuisine. Also think of stews and a diet and dishes that are richer in meat. And think about, what's going on in northern Italy when it comes to geography. And that's where the Alps are and the Dolomites. And so you're making foods that are, not only available in that region, but also it's colder up there. And so you have foods that are, kind of more typical of that type of climate. And also very much influenced by what you would see in Austria or in Germany or in France. And, I mentioned that the Parmesan and the mascarpone are from that region. Also in kind of north central Italy, you'll find like tagliatelle bolognese. So, a tagliatelle, which is a flat, kind of egg-like pasta, long pasta that's in more of a meat sauce. And then in southern Italy, things are made, much more with the durum wheat pasta, olive oil, and also pizza. So when you think about pizza, Naples is famous for pizza. It's traditionally a thin crust pizza with really fresh ingredients, that are topping the crust. So I want to take a step back because all of these foods, the fruits and vegetables, tomatoes a lot of tomatoes are grown in Italy as well, but these herbs, they're indicative of a Mediterranean style diet. So Italy, Greece as well. And on our Dairy World Tour, we'll be visiting Greece at some point over this year. And so what is the Mediterranean diet? And I bring this up because I think it's really interesting. The dietary guidelines for Americans are released every 5 years. And, I'm going to talk about this just because I'm a dietitian. So I'm going to provide a little bit of context. So the dietary guidelines come out every 5 years. And even though they offer recommendations for individuals on how to eat to maintain a healthy lifestyle, to reduce risk of obesity, reduce disease risk. It's more than that. They become the guiding principles that set a lot of policy related to food and nutrition in the United States. So when we think of policy around SNAP benefits or policy around school nutrition, the dietary guidelines help shape that. Well, 5 years ago, in the 2015 iteration of the dietary guidelines, it was the first time they really talked about eating patterns and meal patterns that could promote overall health. And one of the patterns that they recommended is the Mediterranean eating pattern. And the reason that that's recommended is because when we think of the Mediterranean diet, it's very rich in fruits and vegetables. It's rich in whole grains. Meat is used as a condiment to a lot of dishes. Rosetta explained this really well when she said your polpette and brodo, the ricotta balls in the sauce, they're in the broth. You could add a little bit of sliced ham or some prosciutto, but it would be kind of a condiment, and added to that. So meat is considered a side dish. Dairy, just because it's ubiquitous throughout that region, is absolutely included and is a rich source of protein in this diet. So this Mediterranean eating pattern is associated, when we look at scientific literature and studies that have been done on health and populations and eating patterns, we see that it's routinely associated with overall good health. And just recently, like over the last 2 weeks, there were a couple studies published that continue to show this with specific health conditions. There was a study that showed a correlation between a Mediterranean style eating pattern and improved cognition in older adults. A study that shows that the Mediterranean diet helps with prostate cancer progression. So we continue to see that there's mounting evidence that the Mediterranean eating pattern is a healthy eating pattern. So as I was looking into this, and I thought, okay, well, if in the dietary guidelines for Americans, we're talking about the Mediterranean eating pattern being a recommended style of eating for good health, what do Italians recommend? Like, are there Italian eating guidelines? And yes, there are. And so what you see on the screen are the guidelines. I am not going to go through these in any sort of detail, but I bring this up because these were first released in 1986. Italy as a country was noticing just its population, was just like a lot of the world, rising obesity rates, increased disease. And so the guidelines were really meant to get back to a more traditional style of eating, eating foods that are local to the region, and getting back to that typical Mediterranean style eating pattern. So these are the guidelines that you would see in Italy. And again, the recommendation is to just improve overall health of the population and reduce disease risk. And I think it's interesting, often a lot of these recommendations, we think about getting back to the basics and enjoying local foods when we can. So also in this context, when we think of the Mediterranean diet, and we look at Italy and we look at, diets that help promote and connote, overall health, I think back to the blue zones. And so this was, some research that was really done in the early 2000s around pockets of the world where we found the highest concentration of centenarians, so people over 100 years old. And researchers started noticing that there were these pockets where it seemed like people in these societies had greater longevity. And so they wanted to dive into, why was that? Like, what about these particular regions allowed there to be such longevity? And as with most things, it's multifaceted and it's complicated. But one of the things that they come back to is food and the role that food plays in these diets. And the first blue zone that was ever identified is in one of those islands off the coast of Italy, in Sardinia. And what we find is when you look at the diets of people who fall into this category, is that they're eating local foods. They're following this traditional Mediterranean style eating pattern. And food is a social thing. There's a lot of tradition. There's a lot of culture wrapped up in it. So a lot of the things we've talked about today, a lot of the meaning that food has for us, is what we find in all of these regions across the world that have populations who are living longer. Physical activity is obviously a part of it as well, but diet does appear to be, an important part of these correlations. So I want to bring you back to the box, and if you haven't received your box, you will soon, and I hope you really enjoy it. What you have in your box are products that allow you to buy local ingredients, but enjoy some of this global cuisine and culture. And I think back to what I started with about, does America have a food culture? And I would argue that America's food culture really is incredibly varied, because we are all incredibly varied. And I've lived, in America all my life. My parents, have grown up here, but my family's heritage is from Italy. And that's something that's still very important to me. And I know a lot of people across the country feel that, they feel very much like they're an American, but also ties to these cultural traditions that they have in their own family or in friends' families. And so I think it's great that we can take some of these tenets of what we see in the Mediterranean diet, the value of, enjoying what is produced around you that's local, and enjoy some of these kind of global cuisines that are really part of what we find in our American food culture. So we have some resources for you, and Jacqueline is going to pop these into the chat so that you have all the links if you are interested in copying, pasting those. We will be making the slides available as well as the recording, so you will have access to these after the fact, but we wanted you to have them now if you are interested in pulling these off and accessing, anything to learn a little bit more. But it's been, an honor for me to be part of this first Dairy World Tour, and thank you for tuning in and for joining us, and Rosetta for sharing some of your tradition and culture and your love of food with all of us.
Kristi and Rosetta, thank you so much. I knew that this time would go by fast, and sure enough, it flew by. Everyone, you will see, Kristi and Rosetta's contact information on the screen. So we asked them ahead of time. They're more than happy to take more questions and connect with you. We did get a couple questions that we were able to answer throughout. I have one. I think we have time for one. And Rosetta, this goes to you, I think, but Kristi, chime in if you want to as well. What is the kind of like meal structure and or menu structure of Italian eating? Do they have?
That's one that I don't know if I have time to go back and share my screen again, because I just realized I was trying to get through to do the demo that I skipped the last 3 slides. Can I go back to it?
Yeah, go ahead, Rosetta. You can share it, and then
okay, I'm going to go ahead and do that, because as I said, when I got to there, I said, oh, I need to do the demo, and I skipped the demo, and I had these few slides. So I'll answer that question. But this would be a typical meal in Italy. The Italians are not known for eating breakfast as we do, in this country. So breakfast, it's typically an espresso or a cappuccino and a cornetto. So cornetto looks like a croissant, but the Italians will disagree. It's not a croissant. It's different than a croissant, but similar to that. And then they eat lunch around 1 o'clock, which we call it pranzo. And that's typically pasta. Italian, believe it or not, will eat pasta every single day at lunchtime. So it's usually pasta and a salad. And then dinner is in the evening, much later than we're used to in this country. And typically this is when they eat their protein. So they'll eat, their seafood or a little bit of meat and lots of vegetables. And I think the next slide was what a traditional menu structure would look like. I know this is typically what, would happen on a Sunday or when you have guests over. I just want to make sure people don't think, we eat like this every single day, but this would be a traditional meal structure where we would start with an antipasto, which would be appetizers. And then primo would typically be pasta or soup or rice. So like what I fixed today, you would serve that as a primo. Okay, and then a secondo would typically be meat or seafood. And a contorno is always vegetables. So we always have lots of vegetables, more vegetables than meat. Meat is really, a small portion of our diet, and a salad. Typically, we always have a salad, and salad is traditional in Italy to have it after you're done with your meal rather than have it at the beginning, as we tend to do here. And then it would be a dessert on Sunday. Always people go to the pastry shop and pick up desserts, or for holidays, of course, you would make traditional desserts, and you always finish with an espresso and a digestivo. If you've been in Italy, they're always trying to offer you have a limoncello or an amaro at the end. But this would be typical of of what a menu structure would look like.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you, Rosetta. I noticed we forgot to get those slides, and so I'm glad we fit them in.
No, I didn't realize it when Kristi started talking about it. I said, oh, I know, I have those slides. I said, but I rushed through it because I was trying to get to the demo. So I'm glad we covered them.
I agree. Well, Kristi and Rosetta, tons of comments coming in saying, thank you. This was awesome. The recipe was delicious. So again, thank you so much for joining us. And everyone that's still on the call, we have one last surprise. If you're still here, let me go ahead and share my screen real quick. So we have a giveaway. We are going to send one lucky winner a gift basket. It includes Rosetta's My Calabria cookbook, and she signed it. So that's especially a special version. We have an Italy cutting board in there, a pasta maker, and a gelato maker, because you all had a gelato recipe in your box as well. So if I can get a drum roll, please. The lucky winner is Lisa Morby. So Lisa, we'll reach out to you after. Thank you for joining. Thanks to everyone else for joining. We hope to see you at our next episode. It's scheduled for April 28th, 12 to 1:15 p.m. Mountain Time. And we'll be featuring Mexico. We have Chef Ileana de la Vega joining us as our culinary expert, and Connie Gutterson joining us as our nutrition expert. So we can't wait to see you. And here's a teaser for the next episode.
Hola a todos, soy Chef Ileana de la Vega and I look forward to teach you about Mexican cuisine and culture. Nos vemos el 28 de abril.
Mexico.
Bye, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you all so much.